Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jana Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, we give you tips and tricks from experts across the state. We talk about all things vegetables, flowers, trees, shrubs, and of course, your lawn. Thank you so much for listening. Today's show is going to be so interesting. It's a topic that I didn't know a lot about, and now I feel like a semi-expert because we have the team from Progressive Plants on our show today talking about their hydroponics venture. So if you've never learned about hydroponics, it is absolutely fascinating. We're going to get into the science of it. We're going to talk about how hydroponics really can be the way that we can feed the world into the future. So we're going to have the president of Progressive Plants, who by the way is Cameron, who you know on the show well. It's Cameron's mom. So Janet from Progressive Plants will be here, as well as their hydroponics team. So it is going to be such an interesting show. And I can promise you, if you're itching to get out in the garden and talk and think vegetables, this episode is going to fill that need for you. Trust me. But first, the tip of the week.
860 KKAT with your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is you need a grow light if you're going to grow seeds indoors. Now, I know that's a bit of a beginning garden question. However, since I've been talking a lot about when you can and can't start your vegetable seeds indoors, and with a brand new onslaught of new people gardening, which is so exciting, one of the mistakes that we're seeing a lot of is people starting their seeds just in the window of your house. Now listen, even a south-facing window usually will not do. You really do need an artificial light to achieve the right amount of light required by seedlings. Seedlings need a lot of light to grow into sturdy, healthy plants. And listen, no matter what anyone tells you, the chances are you just don't have enough natural light in your house to grow robust seedlings. Otherwise, you could end up with leggy plants that really have a large tilt to them, and that is not what we want. Now, an inexpensive option includes cool white fluorescent bulbs mounted within 6 inches of the tops of the seedlings. And inexpensive fixtures, often referred to as shop lights, can be purchased anywhere from $10 to $20 and suspended from chains so they can be adjusted as your plants grow.
And that's your Gardening Utah tip of the week, brought to you by the Advocates. If you're in an accident, you deserve an advocate. Call 801-355-5550 or visit utahadvocates.com. Never miss a tip for your garden and never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Okay, we have so much to cover in today's episode that we're just going to get right to it. Today, we have the president of Progressive Plants, Janet Simonich, and we also have her hydroponics team, Matt Przybysz. And it is so fascinating to hear what they have accomplished there at Progressive Plants with their hydroponics venture. So I'm really excited for you to hear it, and we're just going to get into the episode right now. Okay, so Janet, Cameron, Matt, welcome to Gardening Utah. And listen, Janet, we've had Cameron on the show many, many times, and we're so excited to have you, his mom, on the show today, and the president of Progressive Plants. So I'm really interested to know first the history and the beginnings of Progressive Plants. So tell us about it.
Well, Progressive Plants started technically its own company in 1985. There were 3 of us who left Native Plants, which probably no one remembers at this time because they've been out of business for a very long time. So we have been around for, as I mentioned, since 1985. We started in Draper, we went to Sandy, and now we're out here in Copperton. So we've gone from 5 acres to 23 acres to 100 acres.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. How long have you had the 100 acres?
We moved out here. We developed in 2003 and actually moved in April of 2004 to the office open for business.
And so the reason for this particular episode is all about hydroponics. So help us understand how that ties in with Progressive Plants.
Well, in many ways, it probably doesn't. However, a long time ago, and it really started much more benignly than it is today, we were actually looking for something not too long after 2008 when everything crashed. And we have a very large production building here, and it was just sitting, and it actually kind of still is. But I was talking to my daughter and I said, what could we do in that building? And not very long before we had that conversation, I had heard about someone who had actually developed some lights and were looking at growing indoor plants or food. And I thought, well, that's an interesting thing. I wonder if this building could be converted to that. That was as far as that went, just kind of one of those off the cuff type of things. From there, I mentioned that to someone who about a year later after that conversation, and he said, oh my gosh, I know somebody who's looking at that very thing. And that was, believe it or not, 7 years ago. And here we are, not that far along in comparison, but between all of that and just going through several different iterations of different systems and that type of thing, I became more and more passionate about feeding people a different way, healthier for one thing, and understanding that what we're doing for agriculture today is not sustainable.
Wow. Okay. And so for our listener base who may or may not have heard of hydroponics, why don't you guys give us like a helicopter view of what that means?
Matt, here you go.
Hydroponics is a method of growing. It is traditionally soilless. So instead of having a soil mixture where you have all of your bacteria and your different funguses that have a symbiosis that helps the nutrients break down into the proper form for the plants to uptake it, we are creating an artificial water that has all of those nutrients already in it. And from there, the plants can feed whenever they feel like it, and we're able to grow just about anything in a water substrate instead of a soil substrate.
And so technically, what is the difference then between hydroponics and aquaponics?
So aquaponics is hydroponics with the aquaculture aspect as well. So not all aquaponics actually utilizes just the fish for the nutrients. Some do supplementary nutrients as well. But for it to be true aquaponics, you will have some sort of symbiosis between the plants and the fish. And the intent is to harvest the fish as well as harvesting the plants to have a complete ecosystem of sustainable food.
So tell me more about what you guys are growing.
So we use two methods of hydroponic growing for our operation. We use what's called a deep water culture. So that is a flowing nutrient solution that our plants actually root into, and that water is constantly moving. So we're keeping the oxygen really filled and aerated down there for the root system. And we have a variety of lettuces going in there. So we have butterhead and butter crunch. We do have some gourmet lettuces. And then we also are using a lot of other greens. So we take microgreen seed and we actually grow it out into a bunch so that we have what we call a salad on a sponge, where you have a mixed variety of greens that all come in one. And then we also have our regular kales. And then we've also recently been working with some of the rainbow radishes, and that's all deep water culture. And then on the top of our system, we have converted some of our water plumbing into a Dutch bucket system. And the Dutch bucket system allows for a lot more aeration and drying back of the plants, so they're not constantly in a water solution. We actually have control of when they're going to feed and how much water they're going to do. And we use that for fruiting plants, so tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, and we're also experimenting with a few fruits over there as well, some blueberries, strawberries, and melons.
And we'll be right back after this, right here on Gardening Utah.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. And today we have the crew from Progressive Plants. We have the president, Janet Simonich, and we have the hydroponics team, Matt Przybysz, and we also have Cameron Allcott, and we're continuing our discussion about hydroponics now. Wow.
So in talking about the bigger picture with the, anything that you buy at the store, for the most part tastes okay. What I think most of us have realized over the years, especially anybody who truly does have a garden, is you forget what tomatoes taste like if you don't have a garden. And If you do have a garden, you don't want to eat tomatoes for 8 months of the year, or maybe 9 months of the year. So we quickly determined that, how can we get a decent tomato? And Matt has done an amazing job, along with Javier, who is our grower, in producing tomatoes that also don't taste like they're hydroponically grown. Because most of the hydroponic tomatoes that I have had anyway still do not even come close to tasting like the ones out of your garden. So this has been a big deal. This is a really exciting benefit from, just these two have worked so hard to get the nutrients to the point where it's just amazing to taste that. The other thing is the kale, for instance, that comes out of those systems. I can't tell you how many people over the last 6 years that have been here through aquaponics and hydroponics. It's like, oh, I don't like kale. I said, just taste this kale. Now it's ruined me where I don't even like the kale out of my own garden. I only want this kale because it is so sweet and so amazing. So yeah, I mean, the flavor's just awesome. And the way we grow within the sponges, we actually harvest the entire sponge. So all the root system is attached to the plant when it comes out of the, like he was saying, the water culture. So we've had, correct me, Matt, I think I've had lettuce and kale in my refrigerator for 3 weeks and it's still fresh.
Yeah, I think typically 3 to 4 weeks is the lifespan that I've gotten off of most of the produce with the root attached.
Yeah, I think at one point we were trying to do like a photo op with like some of the kale that we did. And so we ended up borrowing like one of our other employees here. We're like, here, Shayna, why don't you pose with this kale for a little while? And so we did that. We took the photos and everything, and then we put everything back in the fridge. And then, yeah, like Matt was saying, about 3 weeks later, we pulled it out of the fridge because we forgot about it, and it was still good. It's really kind of crazy. Like when you keep the entire root system intact, how long everything lasts. And the other thing that I think that we noticed too is that when I started traveling a little bit more and going to other countries, and I know Janet's kind of done the same. When we go other places that have distribution methods that are a lot more local, instead of say like, farming everything in California and shipping it all over the country, everything where we've been, is like usually it goes from, farm to table in a very few number of steps. And so the taste and the quality of the food is actually better in other countries rather than even in our own, which we always thought was kind of interesting. And so, the other goal is to try to eliminate that extra couple of steps. So there's less hands or refrigerated trucks hanging onto your food before it gets to your table.
And another point that I just thought of as Cameron was saying that, traditional food production, everybody has seen the different recalls that happen where dozens and dozens of people get sick. The romaine salmonella recall, the tomato recall, that comes from soil growing, because the microbes in there that are used to enhance your soil in certain soil science comes from fecal matter of other animals, which contains bacteria like that. In our system, there isn't and in an aquaponic system, because salmonella is not susceptible on fish, you don't have that salmonella same risk that you would out in the field as well.
Well, and it was interesting, Jana, because I had the opportunity to be at a large, these bigger, like Sam's, Costco, that type of thing. So you're buying larger bags of things. And I was looking all over for when the date on the broccoli, because it was different, the broccoli, Brax, whatever. Anyway, I finally found, it was interesting. I actually found the date that they had 2 dates on this, in which I have not personally noticed before. The day it was packed, and then the day that it was, its expiration date or best before. Okay. I thought that was interesting. I've not noticed that before. So I don't know if that's new or if I've just been sleeping or what's going on, but I thought that was really interesting. So the day I bought it, it was actually packed a week before I purchased it. And then of course they're saying it's good for a week after that. So, and believe me, if anybody's had that, by that week after, or the best buy, it's usually going downhill as far as taste and smell in the case of broccoli. But it's just, as Cameron mentioned, and this is true of a couple of friends of mine, we travel, and she even traveled, one of them traveled in the Middle East, which was kind of interesting. Our comments were, we actually felt better traveling, which is a little different than we did here. So after about 3 days getting back, we were like, hey, we don't feel as good. That was a huge eye opener for me. And just looking at how we distribute food in this country, and maybe a little bit about how it's grown, how fresh it is, and just what that's giving back to us. So hence Cameron's comments about, the faster farm to table idea, and everyone ought to be maybe eating that way versus just, people in other countries.
Right. So why do you think, earlier you mentioned that, the kale tasted better than than the kale in your own garden at home? Why do you think that is?
Well, probably a couple of reasons, but Matt, I'm going to let you take that just a little bit from the growing side of it.
So there are these little molecules inside plants called flavonoids. They are what impact the different flavors that come across all of the produce that we get. So in tomatoes, if you use a certain type of nutrients or a certain type of soil, the fruit will actually produce more acidic type flavonoids or more nutty type flavonoids. So by manipulating the chemical balance within our nutrient solution, we're able to create different levels of flavonoids than is typically seen in soil. As most of your listeners probably know, and everybody on this call knows, soil science is very, very complex, very, very difficult in long-term growing, and has a lot of controversy to it. Not as much is understood about what happens in the different soil levels as what we can see in a nutrient solution that we can monitor literally every element and every nutrient that we put in real time.
A little bit more than what you wanted.
No, that's just fascinating. I was today years old the first time I heard that there was flavonoids. I mean, I guess I didn't ever think of it to that degree. So that's pretty interesting to me.
As most people don't, because you don't really, I think it's interesting because this is one of the big things, where I remember this was years ago where somebody said, where does beef come? They asked a little kid in school and he goes, well, it comes from McDonald's or it comes from wherever, or milk from the grocery store. I mean, but to some degree, we laugh at that, but honestly, how disconnected are we to our food and our food sources? And for those of us who are passionate about hydroponics, about feeding the world a little differently than we're being fed today, and even more so maybe in this country, because we do have such a huge mechanized food processing country. We do that probably more so than any other country just because of the wealth and how we work. But one of the other things is they've talked a lot about food deserts and areas where, people can't get to food, fresh food. And it's interesting because you think about that in New York, and I think that's where I first heard about it. But there was an article not very long ago in our paper about that very thing right around State Fair Park, is that has become a food desert. So if you don't have some way to get fresh food to those people, we have a lot of abandoned buildings. There's so many ways we could feed people differently than the way we do. So I'm pretty passionate and kind of crazy about, how we could do something different than what we're doing today, as well as, we're lacking water. Everybody's developing land like there's more of it to be made. So I just see that there's some huge things coming down the pike. And Matt, you can talk about how little water we use in the hydroponics versus something out on a farm.
Yeah, I was going to ask if this would be a good time to segue into the different production levels.
I just see things, we are heading in a direction that is just for sure not sustainable. And I know that's used over and over and over, and it just doesn't even mean anything to anyone anymore, that particular word. But we really do need to figure out a different way. And where I was going a little bit with the tomatoes, I think when people have eaten something that doesn't have any flavor for so long, they forget what it's like to have flavor. It's like, oh, a tomato tastes like that? Oh, I forgot about that. But it's true with strawberries, the last time we did strawberries in the aquaponics, I wasn't as impressed with the flavor. I'm really happy with the tomatoes that are coming out of the hydroponics, much more so even than the aquaponics. So again, Matt and Javier have really dialed this in, which is really exciting for me, because then you can say, these really taste like tomatoes.
Yeah. So what are you guys currently growing there?
As far as tomatoes, we actually are let me back up just a little bit. So the aquaponics system that we had here, and this system is not ideal. We're actually making do with something that was set up for something different, if that makes sense. And they have really produced some amazing things. And I would have never thought that we could pull off melons in this system, but we'll see. You know, they've done a great job with tomatoes. They've done a great job with the cucumbers. The peppers have been more than we ever thought that they could produce. They taste amazing. So basically we've just kind of come to where we've played now.
Yeah, I was just going to say the peppers and the cucumbers. I mean, we had like some prolific production on those. I mean, Matt and Javier did an amazing job because I think I had a poblano out of there, and I mean, it was huge. I mean, I've grown peppers a lot, and the size of the peppers that they were able to produce hydroponically with the flavor, it was absolutely amazing. I mean, I can't tell you like what it was like. I mean, I know we're kind of like in the middle of nowhere, so it's kind of hard to sample some of this stuff, but I tell you, like the stuff that we grew out here is second to nothing. I mean, it is amazing what you can do with this type of environment. You get some really good growers like Matt and Javier to just kind of figure this stuff out. I mean, the yields were 10 times what I've ever got on my own.
Oh my word.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And the other thing, Jen, is what I was about to say is, so now we have some things dialed in. There's still a couple things we're going to play with, but one of the ideas that we came up with, and actually it came from Cameron's sister, Lacey, she said, what about if we really try to just concentrate on what would you put in a salad?
I absolutely love that idea. That sounds delicious. And now I want a fresh salad. Okay, we're going to be right back after this quick break right here on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jana Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. And today we have the crew from Progressive Plants. We have the president, Janet Simonich, and we have the hydroponics team, Matt Przybysz, and we also have Cameron Allcott, and we're continuing our discussion about hydroponics now.
One of the ideas that we came up with, and actually it came from Cameron's sister, Lacey, she said, what about if we really try to just concentrate on what would you put in a salad? And add to those. But then if we're doing radishes, the radishes taste amazing. So we're doing radishes and lettuce, and you've got your peppers, you've got cucumbers, the tomatoes. So you've got everything that could make a salad, and an easy salad. Okay. And then we're going to grow 3 different, couple of them are heirlooms. A couple of them are, actually maybe we may play with 4 of them. Anyway, tomatoes that are yellow and orange, and, a Brandywine heirloom, so that you've got a little bit of extra that way. And of course the blueberries, the strawberries and things like that. But to be able to actually just have a salad, how awesome is that? Everything you need, throw it in, you've got it. The cool thing about the microgreens, the way we're growing them, is you could just basically cut them off the sponge and you've got like 2 salads just because of the size of the microgreens. And it's way cool. You're just growing them out. They're just not the little guys that you throw on the top of your salad. It's like the whole salad.
Yeah. I would have never in my life thought you could grow a root vegetable hydroponically. Like, I guess I assumed it would need to be able to just kind of, I don't know. How does that even work?
Well, some don't, we've tried beets, we've tried carrots, we've tried a lot of different things. Most of that was done in the aquaponics, but the radishes do really well because they push up above the sponge. And, if Matt tends to join us, we had some huge radishes. We were actually selling the radishes to a couple of the restaurants, and that they just wanted more. They're just like, I can't believe it, because radishes, typically when they get bigger, they get really woody and they're not at all good. Yeah. Well, these were amazing. So we had these huge radishes, and yet they were still awesome for flavor.
Wow. Okay. So that was going to lead into my next question. So you're doing this experiment and you're getting it dialed in. What's the plan?
Well, we would love to educate people in the fact that, guess what? Food can taste good. It's worth paying a little bit more. We're not organic, because organic is really at this point jumping through a bunch of hoops. It doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's just we haven't tested, as far as nutrition, we haven't tested anything like that. USU was down here a couple of years ago. We actually chatted a little bit about that. But I think a live, vibrant food that lasts a long time and tastes like it's supposed to me is a huge thing. And then again, really most of it is just how can we get things changed so we're not trying to grow everything in the ground and just doing things differently. And I could go on and on because there's a lot more information, but not probably for this podcast.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Well, now I know we're going to get this question, so I have to ask it because I know we'll get it. People are going to ask me, well, can I buy some as an end user?
Yes, actually, that's the only way we want to do anything with it at this point.
Okay.
Right now we are donating everything that we grow to the Utah Food Bank. All right. Oh. We obviously need to make some money in order to keep going. I mean, that's the thing. We don't have a good following right now. So we are donating because that's important to us. And my idea has always been, which is great in Utah, the 10%, be able to sell 90% and then be able to still donate 10%. Yeah. At least that, because right now when I guess actually Matt takes it to the food bank, they told him a couple of times ago, I think that most of our greens are going to the seniors, which is kind of cool, so they might actually appreciate, some of the lettuce and what it really tastes like, because they might actually remember. But so anyway, but that's basically where most of it's going right now. But end user is very important to us because by the time you get restaurants in the middle and everybody else, that's not really, it's not the idea. We actually had a girl that used to work here with Matt, and she said, we were talking because the intent for this is to get to everyone. Everybody should have good food and healthy food. And if it's going to the restaurants that charge, more high-end restaurants, who's getting that?
So how much more food can be produced hydroponically versus conventionally?
It's about 4 times the volume per plant. In a typical 1,000-gallon hydroponic or aquaponic system, depending on which method you're using, it's about 5 to 10 acres worth per system. Obviously, vertical growing gets you a little bit more yield because you can just grow straight upwards instead of having to just use all the space like typical agriculture does. You can definitely see how much this is moving us into the future of just grand food production. Some of the larger hydroponic companies out there are producing out of big warehouses, and they're producing the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of acres. So really, it's endless on how much you can produce and how much more you can produce. But the other giant benefit in our climate, if people even wanted to attempt this at home, you can grow plants all year round that you typically can't do in Utah in the middle of January, which makes it a huge advantage towards land use as well. Because if you're using, say you're using 100 acres, but you can only grow on that for 6 months out of the year, the other 6 months that land isn't really being put to its optimal use, where inside a warehouse or in a greenhouse like we do it in a controlled environment, we can produce the same numbers or larger numbers based on space and do that 365.
Wow. So is it similar to, and forgive me for not knowing, but I'm sure our listeners won't know either. So that's the nice thing about having me ask these questions and not knowing a lot about it so it's set up in a greenhouse environment, correct? So that you are able to grow all year long. I mean, I know you just said 365, but is it just like, a different way of growing inside a greenhouse?
You can grow plants all year round that you typically can't do in Utah in the middle of January, which makes it a huge advantage towards land use as well. Because if you're using, say you're using 100 acres, but you can only grow on that for 6 months out of the year, the other 6 months that land isn't really being put to its optimal use, where inside a warehouse or in a greenhouse like we do it in a controlled environment, we can produce the same numbers or larger numbers based on space and do that 365.
Wow. Okay, we're going to be right back after this quick break right here on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah. with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. 860 KKAT with more of the fastest growing show on radio. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. And today we have the crew from Progressive Plants. We have the president, Janet Simonich, and we have the hydroponics team, Matt Przybysz, and we also have Cameron Allcott, and we're continuing our discussion about hydroponics now. So is it similar to, and forgive me for not knowing, but I'm sure our listeners won't know either. So that's the nice thing about having me ask these questions and not knowing a lot about it, so it's set up in a greenhouse environment, correct? So that you are able to grow all year long. I mean, I know you just said 365, but is it just like, a different way of growing inside a greenhouse?
Yeah, our setup is within a greenhouse. We use both natural and artificial light. Obviously, during this time of the year, to do tomatoes and some of your other fruiters, you need to extend that light period to get that photo sensitivity kicked in. So we use a greenhouse, and it is very beneficial having the natural light and the greenhouse climate control to grow in. But you can do this in just about any type of sealed building as long as you can control the climate within.
And that's why actually back in New York, and there are a few other cities that have done this, they have converted some of these larger buildings to do just exactly that, hydroponic food, because they come so far with lighting systems now that you can totally replicate and even better that, the sun. So that's really what you're doing in this situation. And that's why in some cases it's been really interesting for people to start looking at this because, something needs to be different.
Yeah. So I know a lot of our listeners are going to ask, can they do this at home? I've seen, the small little setups, that hydroponic little setups and everything, but is it something that's doable at home?
I would say yes, but like everything that hits the mass market, there's good and bad systems out there. There's good and bad information out there. There are a lot of pre-made aquaponic and hydroponic systems ranging probably anywhere from $100 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. But learning from a reputable source and learning from someone who does this industry is probably one of the best ways to get started in it if they're interested, versus just going and watching any type of YouTube video, trying to kind of target.
Yeah, Matt and I are going to be working on trying to get like some webinars and some educational videos up and going. So I've actually like really tried to move most of what I do more into like the educational sector, as you already know. So we'll be teaming up with the various different professionals that are in the industry so that people can actually learn how to do a lot of these things, whether it's not only just like landscape and plants and whatever, but also like a lot of like food growing in both like the traditional methods and also a little bit more like the radical stuff like the hydroponics that we're doing. So yeah, just keep an eye out for those. We'll let you know as we start launching those.
And Jana, when things open up a little bit more as well, one of the things that we found has been great with the nursery itself is having the seminars out here. We really would like to get to the point where we can do that with the hydroponics too, because I think it's quite fascinating for kids to see that there are other ways to do things. We hosted for 2 years the Jordan School District's Ag Fair. And that was one of the things, yes. And it was interesting because we had sheep out here. We had all kinds of fun things out here. But guess what the kids were most interested in? They loved going in at that time. It was aquaponics. Because I think this is one thing that we've talked about a lot is younger people don't think that the ag industry is interesting in any way or form, in any shape or form, because they think of ag as, I think, farms and tractors and things like that. And where our industry is going, hydroponics, aquaponics is definitely larger systems, robotics, a lot of robotics. And this is where people don't understand anything that is really going on other than the thought of, somebody puts it in the ground and it grows or whatever else. But that's not really where we're going in the future with food. And so we think it would be a great opportunity to be able to open that up and maybe even have a few workshops where they actually plant their own seed, come back in, 4 weeks or 26 days or 21 days or whatever it is, and actually be able to harvest their plant. So there's some different things we're looking at to be able to get people involved so that they understand the system better, and just food, and maybe be able to taste the difference, at some point when we can all get back together again.
Absolutely. You know what you just gave me the visual of is at Disney World. Have you been there where they have the big hydroponics area?
I have not, no.
Okay, now I don't even know if I'm saying it right. I don't know if it's the hydroponics area, but it is a ride. And you go through this ride and they're growing zucchini upside down. And, it's completely opposite than what you're thinking. But the fruiting and just everything is, of course, everything with Disney is over the top as it is. But it's just fantastic. And it is so popular. And I actually do believe it. I think there's an aquaponics section and a hydroponics section as I'm thinking through. So it's actually at Epcot, and it's just incredible. I remember as a kid, and even my children, when they saw it, it gave them so much interest. Like, Mom, how are they growing watermelons upside down? And seeing the roots and things that are just normally exposed by the dirt. It was just such a different experience. And so as you mentioned that, you were hoping to eventually be able to bring children there. I think that's so amazing because it can teach them such a different viewpoint and just be so interesting to them.
Yeah, we think so too. And like I said, I'm extremely passionate about reconnecting with nature. I think that's a huge thing that's missing for people. And of course, Cameron's probably taught you a little bit about that, but that's one thing that COVID gave us the opportunity to do, is get people back into their own yards and connect with nature. It has so much to offer, and we've ignored it with the tech age, so to speak, and it's gotten worse. And I think the kids miss that, whether they know it or whether they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important. It's kind of, I feel like a sense of urgency, it's like now is the time to teach these kids, and I made my daughter this last summer. It's reminding me that, I had quite a few tomatoes in my garden, and I was canning them because my grandmother taught me to can. So I was like, Jane, you are learning this skill because trust me, this is necessary,
Well, and, it's still, to me anyway, when you can your own tomatoes, they still taste different. And the other thing, my big thing is I know what I did to them.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I know where this came from. I know what I did to them. I'm in charge of the nutrients and everything. Okay, so
right.
one question that I see that I have not asked yet is how long does it take to grow things like lettuce, kale, and tomatoes? Is it the same normal growing season in the ground as it is with hydroponics?
It's a faster process in hydroponics and aquaponics. One thing is that the plants always have that moisture level that they need. So the roots are able to send down the receptors that say, hey, I need some magnesium. They can pull up magnesium because it's ready and it's available. In good growing conditions outside, you have that happen, but we can't control Mother Nature. However, in hydroponics, I can control the nutrients. So I'm able to manipulate things to pick stuff up a little bit faster if I change the levels. We use a meter called an EC meter, which stands for an electronic current. So most of your nutrients and fertilizer is a salt. So we actually test the electrical conductivity in the water, which tells us about how many particles per million are sitting within our solution. And from there, we can figure out the percentage of every type of nutrient that we have in there and what we want to adjust depending on what we want the plant to do. If we want to boost some flavors, if we want to make it bushier, if we want to induce fruiting. So we're able to kind of control all of that and guide it. So that gives us a quicker growing cycle in most plants. It's about by 25, 30%.
Wow. That's so fascinating.
So just to give you a little feel for this, in fact, we were just talking about this morning as we're trying to integrate what we're doing in the hydroponics to everything else that we do in the nursery as far as, scheduling and having production reports and things so that we can map this out exactly the way we want. So one of the things is, Matt's telling me this morning for most of the lettuce seeds, we're getting 4 to 5 days from the time he puts a seed in the sponge, which is what goes into the bottom floats of the system. Okay. Where it sits in the water all the time. And basically we're about 26 to 28 days before that is ready. And I'm talking a huge head, way bigger than I ever get in my garden.
Unbelievable. I had no idea.
The other really fascinating thing, and I think it's one of the most important things, definitely one of the things I'm most passionate about with this system, is the sustainability aspect. So in a typical hydroponics setup, a lot of the small ones and at-home systems, you're using actually probably equivalent or even more water than some of the outdoor growing does. But based on the scale of our system, we can actually use our nutrient solution and it stays stable. And when I say stable, I mean the pH for optimal growth and optimal nutrient reception stays stable for up to 6 to 8 months. So we're doing micro water changes using a fraction of the water that's used in any other type of production method. We're basically just topping off the evaporation and what gets soaked up by the plants instead of dumping gallons upon gallons upon gallons over and over and over again. And as water is becoming more and more scarce in our world, this is going to be a necessity moving forward with the agriculture.
Wow, that was a mic drop. All right, so how do our users get it?
We will be posting it as on availability. You know, we actually have availabilities online, live all the time. So as soon as we get this consistently going, and even probably a little bit before we get it consistently going, you'll see something pop up like we have this many, kale, or we have this much in the lettuce, or whatever those are. As this gets going and we really dial this in as far as what we're doing now with our new production schedules and availability, it will come up on a regular basis on our website. We still are working out details on, if delivery or that kind of thing. We just haven't had it to the point that we've needed to work on that. But hey, you can come get your plants and you can pick up your kale and lettuce.
Wow. Okay. That's so cool. I love that. We got to make sure everybody knows that they can get that while they're there, because, I know that so many of our listeners, love to go to Progressive Plants. So got to pick up your veggies while you're there too. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
See our amazing hydroponics system.
Yeah. So can they take a bit of a tour? Is that okay now? Or is this something you have to wait till later? Or?
We can do tours right now. We're trying to keep them to small groups, but also just scheduling it with our office ahead of time. But we are doing tours, and a couple of people from some of the local hydroponic Utah Facebook groups have reached out about interest in coming and seeing the setup as well.
Very cool. Okay. Well, thanks so much for being here on Gardening Utah. This has been fun to learn about something that I knew relatively little about. So thanks for giving me a little bit of a schooling, and all of our listeners as well. And I cannot wait to try the lettuce and the kale. And I need a homegrown tomato. It's killing me right now.
Well, guess what? We actually have some here, so we'll have to figure out how to get you some.
Okay, definitely. I've got to come check it out.
Thank you, Jana.
Thanks for having us.
Well, thanks so much to the team at Progressive Plants, Janet Simonich. Well, thanks so much to the team at Progressive Plants for being a part of the show today. That was so interesting, and I can't wait to head up there to get my veggies. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me today and for listening to Gardening Utah. I hope that you loved the episode. And if you did, I would be so appreciative if you would head over to Apple Podcast or Spotify to subscribe, rate, and leave a review for the show. It is very much appreciated, and it totally helps our show grow. Pun totally intended there. And speaking of Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I always put episode notes there where you can get more information. And we have a promo code to Progressive Plants there. So look in the episode notes and you will find the promo code, and then you can get a discount at progressiveplants.com. I love it. Thanks again so much for listening to Gardening Utah. Shout out to our producer, Lambo. We'll see you next week here on Gardening Utah. And remember, grow big or go home.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden.
We are supported by ProgressivePlants.com. ProgressivePlants.com. They are your neighbors next door and experts at helping you choose the perfect and unique plants that will thrive in your location. Progressive Plants is passionate about helping homeowners, expert gardeners, novices alike choose the correct plant for your soil. They don't just grow plants, they know plants. Let Progressive Plants help you today. Just go to ProgressivePlants.com and check out their wide selection. You can also go to the Design tab and look at the expert expert designers that they have that can help you plan your perfect yard. Visit progressiveplants.com today.